The phone call came just as the afternoon sun was turning the hills from gold to a brittle, scorched brown. It was Henderson. His voice, usually a gentle rumble, was thin and reedy, stretched tight over a wire of panic. "Cal, they won't let them through," he said, his breath catching. "The oxygen delivery. There's a new guard at the gate." I closed my eyes. The hot Santa Ana wind was rattling my window pane, a dry, thirsty sound. Out here in the canyons, that sound is a constant reminder that we live on a pile of kindling, just waiting for a spark. And Henderson, a good man with lungs that had given up the fight years ago, was running out of air. Have you ever had one of those moments? The kind where a simple, everyday problem suddenly feels like the fuse on a bomb. This was one of them. "I'm on my way, Jim," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Don't you worry." I grabbed my keys. On the wall by the door hung my old helmet, a relic from a life I'd mostly left behind. 25 years in the fire department teaches you a few things. First, fire is patient. Second, bureaucracy is not. And third, a locked gate is never just a locked gate. It's a statement. And if you're a regular viewer here on Karenology, you already know what kind of statement that usually is. It's never really about the rules. It's always about the ruler. My truck kicked up a plume of dust as I sped down the winding road. The community, a collection of homes nestled in the high desert hills, was supposed to be a quiet place to retire. But quiet places have a way of breeding their own special kind of noise. As I rounded the final bend, I saw it. The main gate, once a simple functional barrier, was now a gleaming steel monstrosity. It looked like something designed for a military base, not a sleepy suburban enclave. Blocking the entrance was the medical supply truck, its diesel engine idling with an impatient rumble, and standing beside it was a kid in a security uniform that was too new and too stiff. He had the bored, placid look of someone who's been given a little bit of power and intends to use all of it. I pulled up and got out, the heat hitting me like a physical blow. The air smelled of diesel exhaust and the dry, peppery scent of sun-baked chaparral. "What's the problem here?" I asked, walking toward the guard. He didn't look at me, just at a clipboard in his hand. "No entry without a valid resident pass," he recited, like a robot. "This is a priority medical delivery," I said, keeping my voice even. "For James Henderson. He needs it." The guard finally looked up. He was maybe 20, with a face that hadn't decided whether to be a boy's or a man's. "Sorry, sir. New policy. All deliveries must be registered in advance. No exceptions." I felt a familiar cold knot tighten in my stomach. I've seen this before. I've seen lives hang on the thread of a misplaced key or a forgotten code. I took a deep breath. "I have a Federal Emergency Access Code, NFPA certified. It overrides any local policy." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smirk. "That code has been deprecated." Deprecated. The word just hung there in the dry air. A federal safety mandate, the result of decades of tragic lessons learned in fire and smoke, wasn't broken or illegal. It was just deprecated, like an old piece of software. My hand instinctively went into my pocket, my fingers finding the cool, worn metal of a small, bent fire department medallion. It was a habit I couldn't shake. A ghost of a siren wailed in the back of my mind, a memory from a day when another gate hadn't opened. The truck driver leaned out of his window. "Look, man, I can't wait all day. My dispatcher is screaming at me." He gave me an apologetic shrug, put the truck in reverse, and began the slow, awkward process of turning his rig around on the narrow road. Each screech of his tires was another nail in Henderson's coffin. If this whole thing is already getting under your skin, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Because, let me tell you, it gets so much worse. I watched the truck disappear, leaving just me, the guard, and the silent, imposing gate. The silence was heavier now. The guard shifted his weight, suddenly looking less confident. "It's the new rules," he mumbled, as if that explained everything. "Mr. Thorne and the Homeowners Association, they're just trying to improve security." I turned to face him, a slow, cold anger building inside me. I looked at his cheap uniform, the shiny new gate, and the invisible walls they were building around us. And I knew this wasn't about security. This was about control. I let a small, humorless smile touch my lips. "Rules?" I said, my voice low. "Let's test yours." I let that last word hang in the air, but the kid just shrugged, his brief flicker of doubt extinguished. He was a pawn, and he knew it. Talking to him was like yelling at a locked door. So I got back in my truck, reversed hard, and spun the tires, kicking a cloud of angry dust toward his shiny new guard shack. There was another way to my place, a private fire access road that led to a back gate on my property. It wasn't for daily use, but my federal permit guaranteed that gate would open for me, or any emergency vehicle with a universal code. That was the law, not a guideline, not a suggestion. The law. I gunned the engine and took the long way around, the truck bouncing over the rutted service trail. The air was thick with the smell of dry sage and anxiety. I could picture Jim Henderson in his armchair, watching the clock, listening to the wheeze of his own breathing. When you've seen what I've seen, you don't just imagine it. You feel it in your own chest. When I reached my back gate, my heart sank. The simple heavy-duty lock was gone. In its place was a new electronic keypad, the same model as the one at the main entrance. A small, smug logo for Safe Haven Security was stamped on it. I typed in my override code. The light blinked red. Denied. I tried again. Red. I got out and examined the keypad. It was slick and seamless, but then I saw it. A tiny, almost invisible trickle of clear, hardened resin oozing from the manual keyhole beneath the pad. Epoxy. Someone had deliberately and permanently sealed the manual override. This wasn't a policy anymore. This was sabotage. I slammed my fist on the hot metal of the gate. A lizard, startled by the noise, skittered into a crack in the dry earth. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the dust, feeling a helpless rage I hadn't felt in years. What would you have done? Smash the thing to pieces? I was tempted. God, I was tempted. But I had to get to Henderson. I had a small portable oxygen tank in my emergency kit for exactly this kind of field first aid. I grabbed it, slung it over my shoulder, and started hiking through the dense, scratchy brush that separated my property from his. Every step was a curse aimed at Thorne and his damned Homeowners Association. The emergency meeting was that night. The community hall was packed, the air thick with the scent of cheap coffee and nervous chatter. I saw Thorne at the front, a man in his late 50s, dressed in a golf shirt and slacks that probably cost more than my first car. He had the easy smile and tan skin of a man who spends his days making deals, not fighting fires. He was flanked by a younger man in a sharp suit, the guy from Safe Haven. Thorne opened the meeting with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice smooth as butter. "I know there have been some growing pains with our new security enhancements." That was my cue. I stood up. "Growing pains? Jim Henderson almost ended up in the hospital today because your enhancements blocked his oxygen delivery. My federally mandated emergency access was disabled. This isn't an upgrade, Thorne. It's a liability." A murmur went through the crowd. Thorne's smile tightened just a fraction. "Thank you for your concern, Cal. We all appreciate your passionate perspective." He gestured to the man in the suit. "This is Mark from Safe Haven. He can explain the necessity of these protocols." Mark stepped forward, his face a mask of corporate sincerity. He spoke about risk assessment, liability reduction, and integrated security platforms. It was a word salad designed to sound impressive and say nothing. He made it sound like we lived in a war zone, not a retirement community. Then came the punch. Thorne took the floor again. "To bring our community up to this new standard of safety," he announced, "Safe Haven is offering a one-time integration fee of just $1,500 per household. A small price to pay for peace of mind. I'm sure you'll all agree." The room went silent. $1,500. You could feel the air get sucked out of the room. This wasn't about safety. It was a shakedown. I saw it on the faces of my neighbors, the retired teachers, the mechanics, the nurses, people on fixed incomes. But Thorne was a master. He painted a picture of rising crime and falling property values, a picture where anyone who objected was putting the entire community at risk. He called for a vote to ratify the contract and the fee. I looked around the room, trying to catch someone's eye, anyone's, but their gazes slid away. They were scared. Scared of crime, scared of losing their investment, and maybe, just a little, scared of Thorne himself. The hands went up. First a few, then a dozen, then a forest. It was almost unanimous. My own hand stayed down. a lonely pillar of defiance in a sea of surrender. The vote was passed. The contract was approved. I felt a cold wave of defeat wash over me. I hadn't just lost an argument. I had been publicly sidelined, made to look like an obstacle to progress. Thorne gave me a look from across the room. It wasn't triumphant, it was dismissive. The look a man gives a bug right before he steps on it. He had the crowd, he had the contract, and he had the money. And as I stood there in that stuffy, overheated room, I noticed something new. Along the narrow road leading out of the community hall, someone had just finished installing brand new, bright red, no parking signs. Those signs were a declaration of war. They weren't just about parking, they were about access. That narrow road was the only artery a fire engine could use to reach the houses tucked away in the back canyons, including mine. With cars forbidden from parking on the shoulder, the drivable space was technically clear, but in a real emergency, with panic and chaos, that road would become a bottleneck. It was a death trap disguised as a traffic ordinance. Thorne wasn't just building a wall, he was choking off the escape routes. The next morning, the epoxy on my gate felt like a personal insult. It was clear, hard, and utterly unforgiving. I spent an hour with a heat gun and a chisel, the sun beating down on my neck, the acrid smell of melting plastic filling the air. It was slow, frustrating work. Every chip of hardened glue that fell to the dusty ground felt like a tiny, insignificant victory against a much larger machine. While I worked, I thought about Thorne. He was smart, I had to give him that. He wrapped his power grab in the language of safety, a language everyone here understood. He was selling fear and charging a premium for a cure that was worse than the disease. The world feels smaller these days. You know what I mean? Not just because of the internet, but because of guys like Thorne. They build their little kingdoms with rules and regulations, squeezing out any space for common sense or decency. Have you ever been up against someone like that? Someone who uses the rulebook as a weapon? Let me know in the comments, because I was starting to feel like I was in a fight I couldn't win alone. I needed allies. I started with Dave, my old battalion chief, now a retired fire marshal who spent his days fishing and grumbling about the state of the world. I found him at his usual spot by the lake, his line tracing a lazy path across the water's surface. "It's a classic squeeze play, Cal," he said, not taking his eyes off his bobber. The air smelled of lake water and damp earth. Thorne's got the Homeowners Association board in his pocket. He's leveraging their fear of liability. And this safe haven outfit? Never heard of them. Probably a shell company with a fancy logo. He reeled in his line, checked the bait, and cast it out again with a practiced flick of his wrist. "You want to fight this? You can't go head on. He'll bury you in paperwork and bylaws. You need to find a different kind of leverage, something he's not expecting." He gave me a sharp look. "And be careful. Guys like Thorne don't just want to win. They want to crush the opposition." His words echoed in my head as I drove away. I needed something Thorne wasn't expecting. My next stop was a long shot. Leo, the kid down the street, was a high schooler who seemed to communicate exclusively in grunts and video game references. But I'd seen him flying sophisticated drones over the canyons, and his bedroom window blinked with the lights of a dozen different electronic projects. I found him in his garage, surrounded by a chaotic tangle of wires, circuit boards, and soldering irons. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. I explained the situation with the gates and the new security system. He listened, his eyes hidden behind a pair of oversized headphones. When I finished, he just grunted. Then he pulled off the headphones. "The radios," he said. "The radios?" "Yeah, the guards. They're using cheap, off-the-shelf FRS radios, unencrypted. Anybody can listen in." He shrugged, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You can buy a scanner for $30. A $30 scanner. Safe Haven, this bastion of high-tech security, was using walkie-talkies you could buy at a toy store. A small crack appeared in Thorne's fortress. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My final stop for the day was Patrice, our local mail carrier. She was a force of nature, a woman who knew every secret on her route and wasn't afraid to share them. I caught her as she was loading her truck, her face a mask of weary frustration. "These new gate protocols are a nightmare, Cal," she complained, stuffing a stack of mail into a tote. The sun glinted off the silver eagle on her uniform. "Adds an hour to my route. An hour! I missed my kid's soccer game yesterday because of it." She slammed the truck door shut. "And for what? So some slick suit can feel important?" It's ridiculous. She told me something else, too, something that stuck with me. Funny thing is, she said, lowering her voice, I see that guy Thorne's car all the time, but never at his own house. Always parked down the street from the guy who runs that new security company, the one in the cheap suit. They must be real good friends. As I drove home, the pieces started to click into place. A cheap security system, an unholy alliance between Thorne and Safe Haven, a logistical nightmare for everyone else. This wasn't about safety. Dave was right. It was a squeeze play. But it felt like more than that. It felt personal. That night, a notice was pinned to my front door, a violation warning. The mangled remains of the epoxy-filled keypad, which I had left on the ground by the gate, were cited as destruction of community property. The fine was $500. And there was a note scrawled at the bottom in thick, angry black ink. This is your final warning, Cal. The violation notice was a clear message. I wasn't just breaking the rules, I was an enemy of the community. Thorne was painting me as a vandal, a troublemaker, and it was working. The next day, the chill from my neighbors was palpable. Averted eyes at the mailbox, hasty waves that didn't quite connect, whispers that stopped the moment I got close. The digital world was even worse. The community chat group, once a sleepy forum for lost cats and barbecue announcements, had become a viper's nest. Someone posted a picture of my back gate, focusing on the mangled keypad I'd ripped out. The caption read, "Is this the kind of person we want in charge of our safety?" Then came the more personal attacks. An anonymous account, probably Thorne or one of his cronies, posted a distorted version of my retirement story. In their telling, I hadn't retired with honor. I'd been pushed out due to reckless behavior and an inability to follow protocol. They twisted my past, turning a commendation for bravery into a cautionary tale about a cowboy who couldn't be trusted. My reputation, built over a lifetime of service, was being dismantled, one malicious post at a time. The support I thought I had, the quiet nods of agreement from people who knew the $1,500 fee was absurd, evaporated. An online poll that had shown 60% of residents against the new measures now showed less than 15% on my side. I felt like I was drowning in digital ink, the screen of my phone glowing with a cold, malevolent light in my darkened living room. The air was still and stale. It's a strange and lonely feeling, isn't it? To be ostracized by the very people you've sworn to protect. It felt like my whole world was shrinking, the walls closing in. Desperate, I decided to fight fire with fire, or, in this case, bureaucracy with bureaucracy. I spent 2 days buried in county records and fire code manuals, the scent of old paper and dust clinging to me like a shroud. I was looking for a silver bullet, a regulation so ironclad that not even Thorne could ignore it. And I found it. A section of the National Fire Protection Association Code, NFPA 1, which explicitly mandated unimpeded access for fire apparatus on all designated fire lanes. The new no parking signs, the gate delays, it was all a flagrant violation. I drafted an official complaint, citing the code chapter and verse. I included a detailed map, photographs, and a timeline of the incident with Henderson's oxygen. I felt a surge of triumph as I clicked send on the email to the county fire marshal's office. This was it. This was the undeniable objective proof I needed. Checkmate. Or so I thought. A week passed. The silence from the fire marshal's office was deafening. I called Dave. "They're stalling, Cal," he said, his voice grim. "I made some calls. Thorne's got friends on the county board. They've probably buried your complaint under a mountain of paperwork. They'll review it for months." Just as the last of my hope was draining away, I got a call. It was Patrice, the mail carrier. Her voice was rushed, hushed. "Cal, you're not going to believe this," she whispered. "I was on my route, down by Thorne's place, and I saw that insurance guy again, the one I told you about. He wasn't at Thorne's house. He was 2 doors down, at the Safe Haven guy's house, Mark." "So," I said, not seeing the connection. "So," she said, her voice dropping lower. "I know that insurance agent. His name's Peterson. He's Thorne's brother-in-law. I deliver his mail." The line went quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a dog barking in the background on her end. Thorne's brother-in-law, an insurance agent, visiting the head of the security company that Thorne just pushed through on a $300,000 contract. This wasn't just a conflict of interest. This was a conspiracy. My mind raced. A cheap security system that didn't work, an exclusive overpriced contract, and a family connection to an insurance company. What if the goal wasn't to provide security at all? What if it was about something else entirely? I thanked Patrice and hung up. The pieces were swirling, forming a picture I didn't fully understand yet. But I knew one thing. My official complaint, my reliance on the rules, had been a fool's errand. I was playing checkers while Thorne was playing three-dimensional chess. That evening, I found another envelope taped to my door. It wasn't from the Homeowners Association. It was from the county. My complaint had been reviewed and dismissed. A single sterile sentence at the bottom explained why. A recent site inspection, conducted by a certified third party, found all access points to be in full compliance with local ordinances. Certified third party? It was a lie. A bold, blatant, soul-crushing lie. Thorne hadn't just buried my complaint. He'd fabricated a counter-narrative, complete with a phantom inspection. He was untouchable. And in that moment, sitting in my truck, the cold dismissal letter in my hand, I felt something break inside me. It was the last shred of my faith in the system I had served my whole life. I looked up at my house, then back at the letter. The world felt muted, the vibrant colors of the sunset turning to gray ash. Thorne hadn't just beaten me, he'd made me irrelevant. That dismissal letter was more than a setback. It was a public execution of my credibility. Thorne had used the very system I trusted to brand me a liar. The next day, he posted a smarmy, self-congratulatory message in the community chat. He didn't mention me by name, but he didn't have to. He thanked the overwhelming majority of forward-thinking residents for their support and announced that, thanks to their investment in safety, the community's property values were projected to increase. He attached a glowing one-page summary from a real estate firm I'd never heard of. It was a masterclass in manipulation. My phone, which had been buzzing with angry texts and sympathetic emails just weeks ago, fell silent. I was an island. Even Henderson, the man whose life I'd tried to protect, stopped calling. I saw him one afternoon at the local market. He was loading groceries into his car, moving slowly. Our eyes met for a second. I saw gratitude there, but it was buried under a thick layer of fear. He gave me a weak, apologetic nod and quickly looked away. I understood. He had to live here. He couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of the man who controlled the gates. Have you ever felt truly, utterly alone in a crowd? It's a cold, hollow feeling, like the air has been sucked out of your lungs. You're there, but you're not. You're a ghost at the feast. If you're still with me on this journey, I appreciate you sticking around. Let me know if you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where you felt completely invisible. The final blow came from the one place I didn't expect. Leo, the kid from down the street, knocked on my door one evening. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He was holding a small, cheap-looking radio scanner, the one I'd asked him to get. "My dad says I can't help you anymore," he mumbled, shoving the scanner into my hands. The plastic felt cheap and flimsy. "He says you're making trouble for everyone. He's worried the Homeowners Association will, I don't know, fine us or something." I looked at the kid. He was just a boy, caught between doing what was right and obeying his father. "It's okay, Leo," I said, my voice sounding tired even to my own ears. "I get it." He finally looked up at me, his eyes full of a misery that was far too old for his face. "The thing is, Mr. C," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was listening to the guards' radios. They're not just talking about patrols. They're timing you." "Timing me?" "Yeah, every time you leave your house, every time you come back, they log it. One guard says to the other, 'The target is on the move.' They call you the target." He turned and ran before I could say another word, his sneakers scuffing on the gravel drive. I stood there in the doorway, the scanner cold in my hand, the kid's words echoing in my head. The target. I wasn't a neighbor anymore. I wasn't a retired fire captain. I was a target. They were building a file on me, documenting my every move, waiting for me to make one wrong step. I went inside and sat in my armchair, the same one Henderson probably sat in while he waited for his oxygen. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the floor. They looked like bars. I felt a wave of profound exhaustion wash over me. I had fought, and I had lost. Thorne had outmaneuvered me at every turn. He had the law, the money, and the people on his side. He had turned my home into a prison and my neighbors into my jailers. I thought about packing it in, selling the house, moving somewhere else, somewhere anonymous, somewhere a man could just be left alone. The thought was tempting, so tempting. It was the easy way out, the sensible path. I picked up the scanner. It felt ridiculous, a child's toy against Thorne's corporate machine. I almost threw it across the room. But then my fingers found the dial. I turned it on, and a burst of static filled the silent room. I started cycling through the frequencies, the crackle and hiss, a meaningless symphony of noise. I was about to turn it off when I heard it, a voice, clear and sharp. "Yeah, the underwriters are coming tomorrow for the final inspection. Thorne wants everything locked down tight, no mistakes." Another voice, younger, replied, "What are they inspecting anyway?" The first voice laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The fire suppression system, genius. It's the whole reason Peterson is signing off on the master policy. As long as our system is active, the insurance is gold, and so is our contract." I froze, my hand hovering over the dial. The underwriters, the master policy. It was the conversation Patrice had overheard, but now with context. It all clicked into place, a sudden blinding flash of understanding. This wasn't about security. It wasn't even just about the contract money. It was about insurance, a massive fraudulent insurance scheme. And I realized Thorne had made one critical mistake. He thought he had taken all my weapons away. But he had left me one. He had left me his own colossal, arrogant, and very, very flammable lie. That radio transmission changed everything. It was like a lightning strike in a dark room, suddenly illuminating the entire twisted architecture of Thorne's scheme. Let me lay it out for you, because it was both simple and diabolical. Safe Haven's contract wasn't the main prize. It was just the key. The real money was in the insurance. Thorne's brother-in-law, Peterson, was about to sign off on a massive master insurance policy for the entire community. A policy that would grant the Homeowners Association access to cheaper rates and better coverage, all underwritten on the fraudulent claim that Safe Haven's system was a top-tier fire suppression and security network. But here's the genius of the scam. The policy's biggest selling point, the thing that made it so valuable, was its coverage against wildfires. In our canyon, that was the holy grail, the catch. The policy was only valid if the community's fire access and response protocols were certified by a company like Safe Haven. Thorne wasn't selling safety. He was selling a piece of paper. He was selling a lie that made everyone feel safe while actively making them more vulnerable. And in return, he and his cronies would skim millions in kickbacks from the insurance deal. My mind was racing. The no parking signs, the blocked gates, the cheap radios, it all made sense. They weren't just cutting corners to save money. They were actively disabling the real safety measures because they didn't matter. All that mattered was the illusion, the check mark on an underwriter's form. I sat there in the dark, the static from the scanner, a low hiss in the silence. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my gut. But now it was cold, too. It was focused. I knew what I had to do. My official complaint had failed because I was trying to prove Thorne was breaking the rules. That was the wrong approach. I didn't need to prove he was a criminal. I just needed to prove he was a liar. And I had to do it in a way he couldn't bury in paperwork. I had to do it live. I picked up the phone and called Dave, my old battalion chief. The moon was high now, casting a pale skeletal light through the window. "Dave," I said, my voice steady, "I need a favor, a big one, and I need you to trust me, no questions asked." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. "Cal," he said finally, his voice heavy with a weariness I knew all too well. "Whatever you're planning, you know if it goes wrong, there's no coming back from it. They'll eat you alive." "I know," I said, "but if it goes right, they choke on their own lies." I told him the plan. It was audacious. It was risky. It was probably insane. But it was the only shot I had. It hinged on timing, bluffing, and one critical piece of non-digital evidence. The kind of evidence you can't delete or dismiss with a fake report. The next day was the Community Safety Seminar, a mandatory event organized by Thorne and Safe Haven. It was the grand finale of their propaganda campaign, the moment they would officially celebrate their new, secure community. The community hall was decked out with banners and balloons. It felt less like a safety meeting and more like a timeshare presentation. The air was thick with the scent of stale donuts and corporate smugness. Thorne was in his element, working the room, shaking hands, his smile as bright and artificial as the fluorescent lights overhead. Mark, the safe haven suit, stood beside a large projector screen, ready to deliver his spiel. I took a seat in the back, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. In my pocket, my phone felt like a brick. It was connected to a small, high-definition camera that Leo, after a moment of quiet teenage rebellion against his father, had helped me rig near my back gate. He'd also given me a second, more powerful scanner. Just in case, he'd whispered, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. The presentation began. Mark droned on about response times and perimeter integrity. He showed slick graphics of their state-of-the-art command center. From the back of the room, I could see my neighbors nodding along, mesmerized by the show. They were buying it. Hook, line, and sinker. Then Thorne stepped up to the podium for the closing remarks. "And so," he said, beaming at the crowd, "I can say with absolute confidence that, thanks to Safe Haven, our community has never been safer. Our partnership ensures the fastest possible response from emergency services in any crisis." That was my cue. I stood up. "I have a question," I said, my voice cutting through the polite applause. Every head turned. Thorne's smile froze on his face. "Cal," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we've already addressed your concerns." "Have you?" I replied, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Because I'd like to conduct a small live demonstration. Let's test that fastest possible response right now." Before he could object, I held up my other hand, the one holding a second phone. I hit a single button on the screen. Across the valley, a signal was sent. It wasn't a call to the fire department. It was something much simpler. It was a remote trigger for a commercial-grade smoke generator I had bought online, the kind used for movie special effects, which I had carefully placed in the brush 100 yards from my house. On the projector screen, Mark's slick corporate logo vanished. It was replaced by a live video feed from Leo's camera. The image was crystal clear. It showed my back gate, the canyon behind it, and a thick, ominous plume of white smoke beginning to billow up from behind the ridge. It looked exactly like the start of a brush fire. At the same moment, I made the real call. 911, I said, my voice loud and clear in the silent room. "I'd like to report a possible brush fire at 14 Canyon Ridge Road. Yes, I'm at a remote location, but I can see the smoke." The game was on. The clock was ticking. And everyone in that room, including a very pale Mr. Thorne, was about to watch it unfold in real time. The room was dead silent. Every eye was glued to the projector screen. On it, the plume of fake smoke billowed, thick and convincing against the clear blue sky. In my hand, the 911 operator's voice was a calm, professional counterpoint to the tension coiling in the room. "Okay, sir. We're dispatching a unit to that location now." I put the phone on speaker and set it on the table in front of me. Then, I turned on the radio scanner Leo had given me, amplifying its output through a small Bluetooth speaker. The crackle of the fire department's dispatch channel filled the hall. "Engine 12, respond to a possible vegetation fire. 14 Canyon Ridge Road. Cross Street, Vista Drive. Acknowledge." A voice, crisp and professional, came back instantly. "Engine 12 acknowledging. We are en route." Thorne looked like he'd been turned to stone. His face was a mask of disbelief, his knuckles white where he gripped the podium. He opened his mouth to say something, to stop this, but he couldn't. How could he? How could the head of the Homeowners Association, the champion of community safety, possibly object to a live fire drill? On the screen, a small digital timer appeared in the corner of the video feed, a feature Leo had programmed for me. It started counting up. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The dispatch radio crackled again. "Dispatch, this is Engine 12. We are approaching the main gate at the Canyon Ridge community. There's a delay. The access code we have is not working." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People started looking at each other, then at Thorne. His corporate tan seemed to have faded to a sickly gray. "Dispatch, be advised," the voice from the radio continued, a new edge of frustration in it. "The security guard says he cannot override the system. We're going to have to turn around and try the secondary fire access lane." The timer hit 4 minutes, the national standard for response time in a high-risk area. We were already past it. On the screen, nothing happened. The smoke continued to pour into the sky, but we could all hear the distant, faint sound of a siren, growing closer, then fading as Engine 12 performed its slow, clumsy U-turn. 6 minutes, 7. The radio crackled to life again, the captain's voice now sharp with anger. Dispatch, the fire lane on the west side is blocked. There are no parking signs, but the road is too narrow. We can't get the rig through. I repeat, we have no access to the location. The timer on the screen read 11 minutes and 24 seconds. I let the silence hang for a moment, heavy and damning. Then I turned off the scanner and the 911 call. 11 minutes, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. The national standard is 4. In 11 minutes, a small brush fire becomes an uncontrollable wildfire. In 11 minutes, your homes, our homes, are gone. I walked to the front of the room, picking up the microphone Thorne had abandoned. I looked out at the faces of my neighbors. The fear was back, but this time, it was real, and it wasn't directed at me. For weeks you've been sold an illusion, I said, an expensive illusion of safety. You've been told this system, I gestured to the useless Safe Haven logo on a banner, would protect you, but the truth is, it's done the opposite. It has cut us off, trapped us. It's a system designed not to keep fires out, but to keep firefighters out. I paused. The question is, why? And then I played my final card. I didn't have documents or emails. I had something better. I had the truth, told by the liars themselves. I hit play on a recording from the scanner. It was the guard's conversation from the night before. "Nayi, the underwriters are coming tomorrow for the final inspection. As long as our system is active, the insurance is gold. And so is our contract." The words echoed in the hall. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for everyone. The looks on their faces turned from fear to cold, hard fury. It was a palace coup, happening in real time. A woman in the front row, who had been one of Thorne's most vocal supporters, stood up and pointed a trembling finger at him. "You bastard," she whispered. The spell was broken. The room erupted. Thorne, seeing his kingdom crumble, made a break for the door. He didn't get far. A couple of the bigger guys in the room, men who'd reluctantly paid their $1,500, stepped in his way. They didn't touch him. They just stood there, a wall of quiet, simmering rage. In the end, there was no dramatic arrest. Thorne and his brother-in-law were ruined by 1,000 digital cuts. The contract was voided. The insurance company launched a massive fraud investigation. The Homeowners Association was dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up, this time with people who actually cared about their neighbors. The gates came down. All of them. They offered me a role on the new board, a paid position to oversee the community's safety. I accepted, but on one condition. Our first act would be to create a fund, using the money clawed back from Thorne to install modern, independent alert systems for all our elderly and disabled residents. No gates, no guards. Just a simple, effective way for a neighbor to help a neighbor. My victory came at a cost, though. I was no longer just Cal, the retired guy down the street. I was the man who had burned down the old regime. The respect I had was now tinged with something else. A little bit of awe, a little bit of fear. I had proven I was someone who wouldn't back down. And in a quiet neighborhood, that makes people nervous. A few nights later, I was cleaning out my garage. I found the old bent fire medallion in a box of junk. For years, it had been a reminder of a failure, of a gate that didn't open in time. I held it in my palm, the metal cool against my skin. I walked outside, the air crisp and clean, smelling of nothing but the desert night. I walked to the end of my driveway and tossed the medallion far into the dark canyon. It made no sound when it landed. I had finally let it go. I had won back my home, but I had lost the simple piece of being just another neighbor. A fair trade? Ask me again in a year.